Citizen Sleeper begins with a sleeper awakening in a foreign star system on an unfamiliar space station surrounded by strangers. They have just escaped from a life of indentured corporate labor, a life of certainty, but also one of oppression. Their goal now is twofold: survival and freedom. The sleeper must learn to make do in this new, occasionally hostile world, all with the intent of leaving it behind and making a new life elsewhere. Not a life dictated to them, but one that they dictate. Hopefully. Maybe. Life for us begins with coming to grips with a foreign dynamic. Everything is foreign when you've known nothing before. Our goal is twofold: survival and freedom. We learn to make do in this ever-changing, occasionally hostile world, all with the intent of making the most of our time in it. Maybe finding a place or a people to call home, maybe trying to make the world better before we can't do so any longer. Hopefully. Maybe. We are always pursuing these goals, intentionally and not. Sometimes our goal is long-term. Find a home, make a home, whether through a place or a people. Sometimes short-term. Have enough to eat, feel fulfilled in our daily lives, experience joy, however fleeting. Sometimes our circumstances change and how we view our goals changes. Survival becomes escape, becomes a routine, becomes comfort, becomes shaken, becomes something else entirely. Citizen Sleeper reflects our own life journeys back at us through the eye, asking two very simple questions. Why do we stay, and why do we go? Much of Citizen Sleeper's narrative revolves around a countdown mechanic. On one hand, when a day passes, a countdown timer ticks down. You must complete the task before the countdown ends, or else. It might be bounty hunters tracking you down, or a rescue mission taking off without full preparation, or some other event. On the other hand, countdowns serve as a buffer between the sleeper and other characters. The others need time to make preparations for a mission, or they need time to emotionally process actions that they've taken or decisions they've made. They just need time. Come back when the timer's up. Our lives are built up of deadlines and timelines all throughout our days. Think project deadlines at work. You must finish them or risk job termination. Think home repairs. You must address them quickly or your space becomes unsafe to inhabit, but not so quickly that you financially compromise yourself. Even things like events and social gatherings. You must mentally prepare before going to a party, or you're responsible for planning and hosting an event. Fulfill your goal or suffer the consequences, be they social, vocational, or physical. Occasionally, we too seem to disappear from our loved one's periphery for an amount of time. We need to process things, to recharge social batteries, to simply be alone. I've fallen off the radar as I've coped with relationship issues, or job burnout, or trauma. I just need time. Come find me when the timer's up. One of the strangest countdowns I've ever known was my first professional position. I'd worked there for a couple years and was starting to look for work elsewhere. Cultural differences, disagreements with leadership and goal setting, and so on were pushing me away. And I was told sometime during my job search that I had 5 months before my position would be restructured and I would be out of a job. My countdown clock began, and I was terrified. Things were no longer on my terms, and that loss of control, that sense of dread, was pervasive. Months later, after many failed interviews and nothing lined up, my clock ran out. I was in the middle of divorce and separation proceedings with no new job to fall back on. I scraped together everything I could to move into a friend's storage room 2 states away. I was rudderless, but I also know I was lucky to have had that to fall back on. Out of one world, into a new one. I had to rebuild my community from scratch. The building, or the rebuilding, is the hardest part and often why we end up staying, because we can't fathom rebuilding elsewhere. It's why I staved off addressing the giant lifeboat mission in Citizen Sleeper. I knew that once I finished it, it would present me with a choice to get on it and rebuild my life from scratch again, or I would choose to stay with what I had already built on the eye. Familiarity, routine, certainty. I don't know what to expect out on the lifeboat, but even as the ramshackle station crumbles around me, I can count on it in other ways. My second career position saw me working with some of the best people I've ever known, working through some of the worst parts of any of our lives. The COVID-19 pandemic, heartbreak, tragedy, trauma, loss. But we always had each other. It was hell, but at least I knew where everything was. I knew the other people. There was a community, a home. My people, I got to watch them grow, watch them change, and then I got to help them pack, watch them leave, and I couldn't follow them. For a time, I didn't know if I wanted to follow them. The place was constant, even as the people changed, and I latched onto that constancy. At one point, Citizen Sleeper leads you on a horticultural adventure, culminating with an encounter in a garden where life and existence take on new meaning. All you have to do to join the peaceful chorus is sever your ties to the other world, the world of commodity, of capitalism, of pain, in exchange for the tranquility, the serenity of non-being. But I chose to stay. When all you've ever known is life, the alternative, any alternative, can be frightening, even an alternative that promises something better. In some cases, it may be the only thing keeping people tethered to life, that fear of an unfathomable other. Some days I fear that's what's kept me here for so long. I've been something of an on-call first responder in my work before, even though they put other responsibilities above that one in the job description. Between administrative tasks and supervision, I've talked people down from suicidal ideations, tried to help them work through to the other side, did whatever I could to help them stay here, with the living, with us. But someone, without any warning or showing any of the expected signs, ultimately decided to end their life. I was there, a first responder, trying to compress life back into a shell that had been empty for too long already. To this day, I find myself wondering, why? Why would anyone choose to take their life? Was the unknown not frightening, not terrifying to them? Where I see the unknown and fear, did they see peace and relief? When the world feels so hostile towards you in ways you cannot express, when does a community, a place, a constant not tether you tightly enough to itself, to living? Where my sleeper was confronted with bliss at the cost of their existence, the cost of what they knew, perhaps the circumstances would have been different had I encountered the choice at a different point in the story. Maybe if I hadn't established my community or grown attached to its people or became invested in helping them, maybe I would have happily joined that chorus. Maybe it all depends on where we are in our lives when we hear the song and how much its melody may drown out our fear of the unknown. So much of our lives is balancing the hell we know against the hell we don't. Do we put our head down and just keep going, suffering in a familiar pit? Or do we try to crawl out, hopeful that whatever's next, at the very least, can't be worse than this? Sometimes it feels like we are in our own worst version of hell, and it absolutely cannot get any worse. And so anything has to be better. I've felt it before in different jobs, different living situations, that whatever's next can't be worse than this, so I have to find something else. On the spectrum of the unknown, it may not be as extreme as the unknown of death, but what is next is still new, still scary, still unknown. But despite that, hopefully it's never as bad as where we are at, where we find ourselves weighing those options to begin with. Hopefully. Citizen Sleeper offers an out several times over its story, prompting players to decide which hell they would rather chance, the one they know on the eye, or the one elsewhere in unknown space. The hardest part every time those escapes were offered was making the choice to stay. Every time I could get off the decaying station, I justified what I knew over what could be. I took the familiar over the potential. I see times where I've made that same decision for the familiar in my own life, and I recognize those times I chanced the potential when taking the plunge into the unknown outweighed that fear. Each and every time on the eye and in our lives, we are challenged to go and made to justify staying. Citizen Sleeper's overarching plot involves the sleeper carving out a corner of the eye and deciding whether to dig in even further or find a way out and off of the eye. It is a constant baiting of maybe the grass is greener on the other side of the cosmos, but without the certainty of seeing the grass. I made a big move in my life once. Based on the interviews, the job posting, I thought I was climbing up in my career's hierarchy. I was coming back to my home region. I'd have the chance to do hybrid work, flitting between home and office as I was able. I thought the grass was going to be greener based on the description I was given by those on the other side. So I loaded up, came down, and started over again. But when I got there, the grass on the other side was barren, unkempt, and dying. The promises that were made to me were broken. Truth started to seep out past the lies of an optimistic interview process. And in that sense, my dynamic shifted from maybe it's better somewhere else to it has to be better anywhere else. Depending on your moment-to-moment encounters in Citizen Sleeper, you may be tempted to leave, that jumping on a pilgrim frigate or finding adventure out in the stars might be better than this. But maybe you've also just gone through the pits, a narrow brush with bounty hunters and corporate agents, or feeling like little more than a tool used by others. And that temptation to leave grows, becomes stronger, becomes a need. And suddenly joining the chorus of Data or a wayward mercenary crew has to be better than this. It needs to be. We all have our breaking points. Depending on how far we are from it, how close, or how far past it we have already crossed, all dictates what we want to do next, what we need to do next. I've often described Citizen Sleeper to my non-gaming friends as the spoon theory made game mechanic. For anyone unfamiliar, the spoon theory is a metaphor that helps to illustrate how much energy one has to complete daily activities and tasks, widely used by people with disabilities, mental health issues, or who suffer from the exhaustion of marginalization. You start the day with so many spoons, and various tasks require so many spoons to complete. Once you're out of spoons, as the theory states, you're done for the day and can't do anything else. Out of the gate, the sleeper exists in a sleeper body or frame, a piece of corporate property that is designed with planned obsolescence in mind. By intentional design, the body will terminally break down and decay until it ceases to function. This is a calculated design element from ARP, the corporation who claims ownership of the sleeper bodies. While sleepers are performing as designed under corporate ownership, they are kept functional and alive by a steady intake of stabilizers, preventing the breakdown. If a sleeper escapes the corporation, they lose regular access to stabilizers, they break down, and, for all intents and purposes, die. By ARP's count, the threat of decay and death prevents and deters sleepers from going rogue and keeps them subservient. That's a hand that the sleeper was dealt. The circumstances of their existence and their body completely out of their control. Every day in Citizen Sleeper sees the sleeper granted up to 5 dice rolls that they use to live their life aboard Erlin's Eye. The dice rolls reflect numbers from a standard 6-sided die. Higher numbers mean higher chances of success at whatever task the dice is allotted to. You can receive more dice per day by maintaining your sleeper frame. The more it falls into disrepair, the fewer dice you receive at the start of the day. Maintaining the frame requires stabilizers, which, like any broken form of healthcare, cost money. To earn money, you must spend your dice on work. But you don't want to spend all of your best dice on work because that will leave you unable to pursue other ventures, long-term safety, more affordable healthcare, housing, some of which have a countdown timer ticking down every day. So the experience becomes a balancing act of maintenance and progress. You maintain your frame as best you can, but you also push forward against the walls and limits set up against you. Every day, the sleeper is dealt a new hand to make the most of. We are all dealt our own hands too, sometimes at the start, sometimes throughout our lives. Our identity, our birthplace, our skin color, all too often facets of ourselves we cannot control. Even the people we know, the people we are able to know, our ability to advance in our educations, our jobs, there are so many factors of our lives that we simply can't control. These are the hands we are dealt at the start and often have to play with for our entire lives. But we try to make the most of it like the sleeper is able to. They can craft a finely tuned machine of routine, making sure they are fed, maintained, and fulfilled, even with their limited resources, even with the cards stacked against them. We too get into our own rhythm. We find people we can latch onto. We find a way to make a place, a workspace, a new town or a city, a home as best we can. The more I played, the more I fell in love with Citizen Sleeper's upgrade tree, non-traditional as it was. Many games would see you collecting certain items or cashing in experience points to branch out superpowers or abilities. Citizen Sleeper is comparably mundane, but infinitely more poignant. Sleepers have been corporate tools, kept alive by corporate hand, and without needing to consider the alternative. The upgrades in Citizen Sleeper are less upgrades and are instead the sleeper becoming more familiar with the I, its inhabitants, its quirks, its systems. Sleepers receive upgrade points as they complete long-term goals, called drives. Complete enough drives, and you can select an upgrade. But the upgrades aren't you slotting chips into your frame that grant boons or powers. The more you help people, the more familiar you become with the I, the more you learn how to manipulate its processes to benefit you. You're not just slotting a cool rock into a glove, a microchip into a slot, or an injector into your eye. You're learning. You're changing. Piece by piece, little by little, you're understanding more of the world, and in doing so, making it bend to you instead of bending to it. It gives us the tools to stay and make the I ours. In enough time, it makes us feel like we can go anywhere, like we can do anything. In the times I worked as a restaurant server and theater crew member, I remember getting accustomed to those systems, places, and people. And part of me could have stayed, but it wasn't sustainable financially. I had everything from a partner to help support to loans looming over me to a need to move out of a home or region I was in. They were good jobs. I had fun, I did good work, and I left at the end of a shift. But they weren't sustainable, so I had to look elsewhere. And I told my boss at the theater exactly that, to his face. This has been one of my favorite jobs that I've ever had, but I can't do it for $12 an hour. The hands that we are dealt dictate how we play the game. Citizen Sleeper's mechanics are brilliant, both as narrative devices and reflections of our own lives. The recognition that certain tasks take more or less effort than others, only having enough in us to do so many things a day, being able to use money, funds willing, in order to essentially buy that which would take time instead, becoming better at manipulating a system the longer we are a part of that system. They are oppressive mechanics, yes, but both we and the sleeper can make the most of them. Or maybe we just make enough of them. And that can be enough to both answer why we stay and lend credence to why we go. And you are glad to be here in this strange and beautiful place a little longer. At the end of my time with Citizen Sleeper, I ultimately chose to stay. So many opportunities to go arose because of my actions, my choices, my relationships, and I turned each of them down. The I was my home. The routine I made, the differences I enacted, the people that remained, the people I knew that I cared about were my home. And in so many times throughout my life, I have chosen to stay. The opportunity to leave presented itself, sometimes rose to meet me, and I pushed it away. Almost every single time, I stayed because of people. Coworkers, friends, family, sometimes overlapping between those categories. But almost always, it was people at the center. This place, these people own you. They are what makes you get up every cycle. They are what keeps you breathing. Citizen Sleeper is a comforting tragedy. Seeing the parallels between the broken system of the I and our own lives is disheartening, saddening, and unnerving. But there is comfort seeing what the sleeper holds dear mirrored in our own lives. In the communities we build, the friendships we find, in what we manage to carve out for ourselves in spite of everything put in our way. I've chosen to go for new job opportunities, wanting to be closer to family or wanting a place of my own after sharing space with others. I've stayed because of the friends that I made amidst the worst of it, because I craved routine over change, or simply because I wasn't brave enough to take the plunge into the unknown, into whatever was next. I am constantly torn between these two dynamics. I want to stay because I've made a little corner for myself in this place, because it's familiar, because it's safe. But I want to go because things might be better, they might challenge me, they might help me grow into a better version of myself. But I have to stay because I can't afford it, or I don't have a job that lets me move, or a job, period. But I can go if I empty out my coffers, start completely from scratch, cut the tethers, leave the eye, and drift into the unknown, but with an ominous timer hanging over my head the entire time. Make no mistake, the unknown of both futures of what happens whether you stay or go is scary. But scary as they are, there is certainty still. Time will continue to move forward, and us with it. All we have is today, paving the way for tomorrow, that paves the way for tomorrow, that paves the way for tomorrow. And maybe, day by day, that's all we can do. And that's still something. And in this frozen moment, you focus on only the next step, because that is the only way you have learned to persist. And to persist is to believe that a future, any future at all, is possible. Our reasons are different, and they may fluctuate and change from day to day, moment to moment. Everyone has their reasons for doing what they do, or for wanting something new, or pursuing something different, something better. Everyone has their own reasons, as many as the stars in the sky, for why they stay and why they go.